You're really good.
Thank you.
Sometimes
Thank
it takes
you.
a whole bunch of brains to get it right. We've been studying prayer for about 5 weeks. We're in the 6th week. We started with the definition of prayer and what Jesus taught us about how to pray. And then we began looking at Bible personalities who prayed to see who would learn from that, what we could learn from them, starting with Abraham. And last week we studied the prayer for Abraham's chief servant when he went to Abraham's family to find a bride for Isaac. And here's what we learned from this prayer, just as a review.
Gary, that background noise that's going on with somebody is so loud we can't hear you.
Pause it here. Everybody check and make sure there's no TV on or
Go back.
what, Gary? I don't know what he's saying.
Okay. Yeah,
Gary, you're muted.
there's Karen.
What?
It's feedback. When Gary talks, you get that about a second behind.
Oh, what do we do about that?
I have no idea.
Hey, Karen.
I had the wrong Zoom. They said you were on another Zoom, and I'm like, no, I've been shut out.
Mm.
Let me see. Yep, I got an email.
Gary, can you back up or something?
It's not, no, this isn't. This
No,
is,
we're good.
we're just, this is an echo or something. I tell you what, everybody mute your mics unless you want to talk. That will help.
Go back to record again.
I'm recording.
Okay.
Okay. Last week we studied Abraham's chief servant's prayer when he went to get a bride for Isaac. And here's what we learned. We learned that our prayers must be in faith. The servant's prayer was accepted by God, even though it seemed like a challenge to God. Because remember what he prayed, he said, Lord, if this woman comes and if she draws water for all the camels and so forth, let it be the one. But you know, God didn't say no to that. In fact, he answered it before he finished praying. So there's nothing wrong, apparently, with praying like that, as long as you're praying something in humility, I believe, and it's Lord's will. It's something that God wants. Obviously, it was God's will for Abraham to get a bride for Isaac from his family, not from the place of Canaan. And so he was doing God's will. He was doing the right thing, and God answered it. And when God answers our prayers, we have to go back to him with thanksgiving and worship. It's very important. When he answers our prayers, we need to go right back to him and say, thank you. And lately, I've been thanking him a lot because there's been a lot of answers to prayer, especially with this group. There's been a lot of answers to prayer. And wow. To think that Lisa, Sharon's daughter, was trying to get a job with NASA, and we prayed for that a couple weeks. Praise God, she got the job. So I've been saying thank you this week because that's just so important. Today we're going to study two prayers of Jacob and kind of look at the difference between the two prayers. We're going to start in Genesis chapter 28, verses 10 through 21. Very interesting story. And it's kind of a long thing. Martha's going to read it.
Jacob left Beersheba and went toward Haran. And he came to a certain place and stayed there that night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place to sleep. And he dreamed, and behold, there was a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give you to you and to your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. And in you and in your offspring, all the families of the earth be blessed. Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go and will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place and I did not know it. And he was afraid and he said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate to heaven. So early in the morning, Jacob took a stone that he had put under his head and set it up for a pillar and poured oil on top of it. And he called the name of that place Bethel. The name of the city was Luz at first. Then Jacob made a vow and said, if God will be with me and keep me in the way that I will go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house, then the Lord will be my God. And this stone which I have set up for a pillar shall be God's house. And all that you give me, I will give 1/10 to you.
Okay, I'm talking, the prayer is this last verses 20 to 22. It's really kind of, it says Jacob made a vow, but it really is like a prayer. So I'm considering it a prayer. Anytime we talk to God, it's a prayer. So I'm saying that that's a prayer. So let's talk about the background. So Isaac and Rebekah had trouble having children. They were married for 20 years and had no children. And it says that Isaac prayed for Rebekah and she got pregnant and she had twins, fraternal twins. But they were really fraternal twins because the two of them were like polar opposites. Esau, who was the oldest by a few minutes, and Jacob was the youngest. And Esau was kind of red-haired and he liked the outdoors. He liked to go hunting. He was the typical redneck outdoorsman. And Jacob was more a homebody. He worked hard for his dad and worked with the sheep and stuff, but he liked to be at home with his mom, and he was kind of a mother's
He was mama's boy.
He was mama's boy. So Esau was very flippant about the inheritance, and he sold his birthright to be the firstborn to Jacob for a bowl of soup. And then Rebekah and Jacob tricked Isaac into giving Jacob the blessing that was to go to the firstborn son when Isaac was bent on giving it to Esau. And when all this happened, Esau became very angry with Jacob and vowed to kill him. Therefore, Isaac and Rebekah sent Jacob to Haran to stay a while with Rebekah's brother Laban until Esau would cool down. And they told him he should look for a bride from among Laban's daughters. While Jacob was on the way to Haran, here he had the dream that we just read. In this dream, God repeated promises he'd made to Abraham and Isaac. And there's a great difference between what God told Jacob versus what Jacob said in response. God made several promises that were completely unconditional, and they were awesome promises. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. So let's talk about the prayer. I'm going to read it again in verses 20 to 22. Then Jacob made a vow saying, if God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then God shall be my God, and this stone which I have set up for a pillar will be God's house, and of all that you give me, I will give you a full tenth.
I'm not sure.
Do you see anything wrong with Jacob's prayer?
He's putting conditions on God. Can't be conditional. We just have to we're called to obey, not to, God, you give me this, I'll do this for you. We can't do that.
It's all what Jacob wanted.
Yeah. He started with the word if.
Yeah.
Is it a prayer of faith?
No.
No. From my perspective, this is a challenge to God, not really a prayer. Just like Bob said, he's putting conditions on God.
Well,
And-
Jacob didn't know God yet, though, right? So he sort of needed a little bit of proof, I think. No, would you say?
Yeah, he ended up with 20 years more of proof. It took him a while.
I
No,
know, I know.
I think Betty, I think you hit the nail on the head. He didn't know God yet.
Yeah.
You would think he's 40 years old. You'd think he'd know God by now. If he grew up in that family, he should have known about God, but he didn't.
Yeah.
I'm sure that when Isaac was 40 years old, he knew about God.
Isaac had already been trying to be offered on an altar.
Yeah, but he didn't teach his sons. Esau never came to know about God, never came to trust God that we know of. This was not a prayer of humility.
Kind of his way of putting out the fleece, the same thing. If you do this and this and this and this, then I'm going to believe you.
Yeah.
But like you say, it has the twist of
It's kind of
the cosmic ending machine, you know?
It was a very, very proud prayer.
Right.
Compare this with what God told Jacob, and there's no comparison. That hit me this. I studied this week, and today, as I was just reviewing before this, it hit me really hard. Look at what God said. That's what's important. Look at what God said.
Right.
God made promises that were totally, completely unconditional. And they're beautiful promises. They're just beautiful promises to a man that was just really didn't even believe in God yet. And he was
Prophetic too, about, you know, being taken from the land, but not to worry, you're coming back.
yeah.
As many times as you go away, I promise you, I'm bringing you back.
It was actually very prophetic because it says that in you, in your family, all the peoples of the earth are going to be blessed. That's a prophecy of Jesus Christ.
Right.
Of all this whole thing, Jacob's response was pretty pitiful, but God was powerful.
He always is.
He always is. Oh man, I got excited when I read that again. I got excited about that piece about God. Even though Jacob had not trusted God yet and seemed very arrogant, God literally came to him and showed him a brief glimpse of heaven. He made promises to him, even though Jacob wasn't ready to accept it. But this is who God is. We just got shown in this one passage a little glimpse of who God is. He has chosen us before we were ever born, knowing full well that we would be both good and bad. And in some respects, we're more bad than good. The Almighty God was willing to send his son to die for me, even though he knew I would fail him repeatedly. What a fabulous God we serve. What a fabulous God we serve.
He's really a father.
Pardon?
He's a father. He's an always loving father.
He
loves
is.
his children.
He's the best father ever.
Unconditional love. Yeah.
I mean, the fact that he saw the angels, going up and down those stairwell. I mean, in Hebrews, they call those the ministering spirits. And it's in Hebrews, I got the note here, 1:14. And it's for those that will inherit salvation. They haven't inherited yet. So the spirits are down here to
Yeah. Well,
minister, I don't know, to serve at least in some way.
God showed Jacob a scene that very few people in history would ever see. Only like prophets like Isaiah and Ezekiel saw those kind of things.
Yeah.
And Daniel and Apostle John. There were very few.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting the stipulations that uh, that Jacob gives so that God would be his God. He said, "If God will be with me and will keep me in this way, and I will go, and He will give me bread to eat, clothing to wear, so that I can." He was like, to be his God, all he needed was bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that he could come to his father's house again. And he said, for that reason, he would be my God.
You know why he said that is because when he left home, he left with nothing. And
Nothing.
even
Yeah.
though he had bought the birthright from Esau, and he should have had all his father's wealth. He didn't.
Uh-huh.
He had to run for it.
He had to run for it with
Yeah.
only the clothes on his back. That's why he had to work for Laban for 14 years or whatever.
Well, that was just to get the ladies.
That's just get the ladies, but he had to keep working for him to have any wealth.
He worked for 20.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So let's go to the second prayer, and that's found in Genesis chapter 32, verses 9 to 12. If someone could read that for me.
Then Jacob prayed, O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, Lord, you who said to me, go back to your country and your relatives, and I will make you prosper. I am worthy of all this kindness. I am unworthy of all this kindness and faithfulness you have shown your servant. I had only my staff when I crossed the Jordan, but now I have become two camps. Save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I am afraid he will come back and attack me, and also the mothers with their children. But you have said, I will surely make you prosper and will make your descendants like the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted.
So let's talk about the background behind this prayer. This prayer happened 20 years later. A lot of water went under the dam in 20 years. Jacob, when he reached Laban's house right after the first incident, he saw Rachel. She was the first person he saw of Laban's family, and he loved her, and he was willing to work 7 years to earn her as his wife. But Laban tricked him into marrying Leah first. But then came strife and babies. Leah and Rachel quarreled often because Jacob loved Rachel more than Leah. But God was gracious to Leah and gave her children, while Rachel remained barren. Leah and Rachel both gave their servants to Jacob so they could bear children for Jacob. Leah had 6 boys and a girl. The two servants each had 2 boys. Then God allowed Rachel to give birth to 2 boys, for a total of 12 boys born to Jacob. Jacob finally decided to leave Laban, but he had a hard time breaking his link with Laban. But God met with him and told him to go home. In Genesis 31:13, it says, I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar. This is the first prayer, and made a vow to me. Now arise, go out from this land, return to the land of your kindred. So God did speak to him, and but Jacob was afraid of Laban and so forth, and he tricked Laban and left in secret, and Laban chased him. But God protected Jacob from Laban. But Jacob still had to face his brother Esau. He was afraid of Laban, but he was terrified of Esau, especially when he learned that Esau was on his way to him with 400 men. That's actually, for them, that was a pretty good sized army.
Y'all put your mutes back on if you don't mind, so we can get rid of that
Something or other.
whatever noise it is. Thank you.
So when he found out that Esau was coming with 400 men, Jacob prayed, and that was his prayer. Let's talk about the prayer. this time Jacob addressed God with great respect and humility.
Yeah, well, humbleness.
He reminded God that he knew that God was the God of Abraham and Isaac. He also mentioned that God was the one who told him to return to his own country, which he had. So now he's praying in God's will. That's one of the things that we're told to do. We're told to pray in God's will. Jacob was doing that. He was praying in God's will. But he also showed that he was much changed. This time he was humble before God. He said, I am not worthy of the least of all the deeds of steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. What a change. What a change.
It took him 20 years.
It took him 20 years. Now Jacob knew that it was God who had given him everything. And he even admitted his own shortcomings. What are shortcomings? Sin. He even knew that he admitted that he was a sinner.
Well, he also recognized God's promises lasted, that God was faithful.
He
and
did.
He could be trusted.
That's right.
And I think he probably, in his position, he probably didn't trust a whole lot of people.
Well, Jacob was learning to have faith in God. And
Right.
you learn to have faith in God, and small things happen, and then bigger things and bigger things and bigger things, and all this stuff piles up in your experience to the point that you have strong faith. At this point, his faith was still growing. And but wow, what a difference. And I love this prayer. He went from being arrogant and prideful to a humble man, knowing he was totally dependent on God. Which prayer did God respect? This one.
Obviously.
This is the prayer this speaks to what Jesus told us about prayer. And let's talk about the answer to this prayer. God did what Jacob asked. Genesis 33:4. But Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. They had a peaceful reunion. And God had changed Esau. Esau would not have come with 400 men if he didn't mean to have revenge on Jacob. But God, in the process, listening to Jacob's prayer, made a change in Esau.
And wrestling him all night. Yeah.
God changed Esau, and it protected Jacob. So God specifically answered Jacob's prayer. And I just think that's beautiful. God made all these promises to Jacob. He made all these promises to Jacob, and then he started fulfilling them almost immediately. He gave him wives, he gave him children, then he gave him wealth, and he helped him, and protection, and protected him from both Laban and from Esau. So what can we learn from Jacob's prayers? I think the first thing we can learn is it's critical to pray in humility. Jacob's first prayer was very prideful. His second prayer was humble. Now, God heard what he prayed the first time. I don't think he responded. Jacob went through some really tough times learning to trust God. He went through some really hard times. Can you imagine waiting 7 years for a bride, and he's probably drunk when he went to bed? It was dark, and he woke up, and
behold, it was Leah.
And behold, it was Leah. He didn't love Leah. He loved Rachel, but now he was bound to Leah. Then he had to work another 7 years to get Rachel.
No, he got her, but
He got her almost after a week, but he still had to work another 7 years to pay for her because he had no money, he had no resources. And then the strife in his family. Oh holy cow, you read those passages and you go, I wouldn't want to be in that family. I wouldn't even want to be in the next county.
Anytime anybody says, well, do you think they would have, bigamy would make that all right? Have them read that passage and go, what do you think?
It doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
It doesn't work. And yeah, Jacob went through an awful lot. But by the time this happened, he was down on his knees before God and he was humble before God. He realized that God was working for him. His faith in God was growing. And guess who was a little child when this happened? Joseph. So Jacob's older sons grew up in a time when Jacob wasn't trusting God so much. At all. And then Joseph was just a little boy when all this was happening. And he grew up during the time when Jacob was older and he was trusting God, and he learned about God to the point that when we study about Joseph through the end of Genesis, you find out there's no sin recorded against Joseph. Joseph trusted God all the rest of the time. And when his brothers came, he wept over them, even though they treated him like dirt. He wept over them. So this made a big difference in Jacob's life. And Jacob prayed based on God's will. What he was praying for, God had already promised him. He knew this is what God wanted because God promised him. And God didn't say if, I will protect you. So Jacob was praying according to God's will. That's important. We know that God does what he promises to do.
But again, I think he had to learn that God really was protecting him in all things. And even the 7 years that he had to work, that was orchestrated by God to get him to trust God's faithfulness.
Oh, absolutely.
And so then when Joseph comes along, Joseph sees that. And one of the things that struck me was in Joseph's life, and he knew that God was always with him. And Jacob had to learn that.
Yep.
God was always with him too, but he didn't recognize it because he was depending on himself.
Right.
Right. It took him a lot of years.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that Jacob did not ask God to destroy Esau. He simply prayed for protection from him. I think down deep, Jacob still loved his brother. And I think it's important. I think that earlier on, had something like this happened when he was at Bethel, Jacob's prayer would have been different. But by this time, he didn't want to have any kind of forceful physical confrontation with his brother. He just wanted a peaceful reunion. He wanted God to protect him and his family. He knew he could not fight his brother. His brother was too strong for him.
And he obviously passed on that lesson to Joseph.
Yes, obviously. And as I was sitting, as you just said that, I was just thinking I can visualize these conversations between a little boy and his dad. Dad, what's going on? What and Jacob explaining it to him.
Daddy, how come?
That's right. And then Jacob prayed in faith. He believed that God was going to protect him.
But I wonder why. I just kind of wonder, because he went on to. It was still kind of a bit of a scheme that he had to. After this, when he had all these gifts, and then he sent one, then he sent another, instead of just going out there himself. So I'm not sure he was 100% there yet.
He did that before he prayed.
Oh, I thought he did that after he prayed.
No, he did that before he prayed.
And he also did that before, or got it arranged before he wrestled with God all night. When he went ahead and did it though afterwards.
Yeah. I know.
So Jacob wasn't there yet. I mean, Jacob was still learning about God and still,
Yeah, because he told
building his
Esau,
faith.
yeah, I'll come behind you and I'll be there later. And then he went to someplace completely
Yeah.
different. So
Right, okay.
yeah, Jacob wasn't,
he hadn't arrived
he
yet.
hadn't arrived yet. But so I have in my notes, at least there was a kernel of faith in his prayer. It wasn't perfect faith, but at least there was a kernel of faith in his prayer. And I believe that's where I am a lot. Yeah, I feel like the father of the kid that was that Jesus was going to heal, and Jesus says, if you only have enough faith, and the father said, I do have faith, help me,
Help my unbelief.
help my unbelief.
Yeah.
He recognized that he had a kernel of faith, but he had a whole lot of unbelief. And I find myself there sometimes.
Yeah.
Kind of a lot of times. And certainly that's where Jacob was, I believe. Any comments or questions about this? There wasn't.
I just
No.
laughed when Martha says it took him 20 years. In my testimony, when I'm trying to be humorous sometimes, I'll say, it took me 22. I wasn't trying to outdo him, and I didn't really want to wrestle with God either, and that might have wrenched. Yeah.
Yeah.
Luckily, he got through to me at 22.
You tried wrestling in high school, it didn't work, right?
That's right. I mean, yeah. I was in a lower weight class or something. I don't know.
Yeah. Absolutely. I just now I want to talk about where we're going to go with this study. I've been going back and forth in my mind. I think what we're going to do is two more weeks in prayer. Next week, I think we are going to. I've been on the fence about Gideon. I think we are going to talk about Gideon's prayer over the fleeces and stuff, and talk about Gideon next week. And then the week after that, I want to go to Daniel. And there's a prayer that he makes with Nebuchadnezzar that I think is a good one for us to study. And then I think we need to go to something else. So be thinking about what you want to study next.
Okay.
And you could email your ideas or text me or whatever. Yeah, we can talk about it.
All right.
So I'm going to turn off the recording.